Days are states, as the poet said. One day is ours, one day is against us. One day we are sad, and another day we are happy. Words from the pages of history indicate that we pass among countries, states, and kingdoms, sometimes slowly and sometimes quickly, but in the end we leave. Streets of the city speak to me and laugh at my sadness, telling me that I am smaller than a drop of ink that fades between the lines of its book. Our sorrow are only illusion, a memory that clings from a moment, in a branch that shakes before its violent winds. Today I lived through the play Exit the King, written by Eugenio Nisco, and I find, as always, a similar state of what Baghdad had gone through in the royal era before its fall. In the play, things are not going well. It's very cold. The heating doesn't work. A crack appears on the wall. The health of the king is deteriorating, and the soldiers no longer obey him. The end of the kingdom is imminent and clear, but the king denies everything that's going on around him and acts like everything is fine. And all these signs and all the things that were going on around him and the warnings from all sides, and the king pays no need to it. Even when his crown or his scepter fails, and even when he realizes that he no longer has power over his soldiers, he continues to believe that these are all just problems and that things will get better. The play speaks of the agony and collapse of the kingdom. The king tries to stop the rebellion. He shouts to the guards, "Arrest them all, lock them in the tower." No, the tower has collapsed. Take them away, lock them in the cellar, in the dungeon, or in the hutch. Stop all of them. I order, but the guard is paralyzed. He doesn't move. The king's health deteriorates and the kingdom collapses. The scenery disappears. Then everyone disappears and the king is left alone with his fate and the inevitable end, death, the end of the kingdom. The play resembles in a way the time that Iraq was living in during the royal era, the murder of the last king in Iraq and the end of the monarchy in 1958, when the king's palace was besieged by rebel forces. Then he was killed, he and all his family. That day, King Faisal II was preparing to travel to Turkey to meet his beautiful fiancée. He spent the evening with his family and loved ones, talking about the preparations for the wedding. He was 23 that night. That beautiful morning, he was preparing for his trip, which will take him to his distant and charming fiancée. The king had spent his last period looking for the suitable, charming bride. This research journey took him to many parts of the globe. The journey to find a fiancée began with the American Genevieve Arnold, whom he met in Switzerland. The later filed a complaint against him after his death and received large compensation from King Faisal's deposits in American banks. Then the second princess, Shahnaz, sister of the Shah of Iran, where the first meeting took place between the king and the princess in Cannes, France, 1955. The third is Princess Aisha, daughter of King Mohammed V, and the encounter also took place in the French city of Cannes. And the fourth, the Turkish princess Fadila, whose lineage goes back to the Ottoman Sultan Abdulmejid, whom he also met in the city of Cannes and whose engagement was announced after 6 months. What is strange is that the whole research trip took place outside Iraq because he wanted to marry a daughter of a king or a descendant of a king. During this prolonged period of honeymoon and fantasy, when the king was immersed in the maze of choosing from numerous brides, the leaders of his army, the free officers were meeting, plotting and preparing the plans to bring him down. So the question of his death became a matter of time, no more. They were just waiting for the opportunity to make the successful coup d'etat. But the king was ignoring what was happening around him, ignoring the warnings from inside and outside Iraq, even from Iran, from Jordan, from many countries. And all the Prime Minister Nur Said did, he made one of the army commanders, Abdelkarim Qasim, swear not to make a coup d'etat, but the later actually did. And like what happened to the king in the play Exit the King, the king completely denies the imminence of his end. He doesn't realize the danger that threatens him, nor does he realize that he has lost power over his guards and over his kingdom, which is gradually collapsing. And like the play, the monarchy fails and ends. In the play, Exit the King, everything collapses in the kingdom. Lands crumble, mountains crumble. The sun rises late, dust and cobwebs invade the place, and on the wall an irreparable crack appears as a sign of the end of the kingdom. And in the kingdom, the people are talking. The coup d'etat is imminent. The army is rebelling, and the people are boarding, and the officers are chiming, arguing, and even struggling, while the king, looking for the blonde with the beautiful blue eyes that will make him live in the world of beauty. And the army turns against the kingdom, and the revolution takes place, and the king is unaware. Even his servant asks him to turn on the radio to hear the statement number 1 of the revolution, and the king dies, killed, and the kingdom ends and becomes a memory. But that's exactly how UNESCO wanted eternal memory engraved on the stone of memory. Since that day, the monarchy is only a memory. People remember it with deep nostalgia of a bygone era of stability and of a particular situation in which the country lived. The king lived with his throne and his scepter, and the kingdom disappeared with the military coup d'etat, which didn't stop succeeding one another, creating many and various conflicts and long social militarization. The king is dead. Long live the king. But this time the king is gone. Exit the king is a condition that applies to many countries, many nations, and many social changes. In the play, the queen says to the king, you can no longer govern it. You say to yourself, you don't to admit you no longer have power over yourself, more power over the things that surround you. You can no longer prevent damage. You no longer have power over us. And really, the king couldn't do anything. It's too late. And the play ends with the disappearance of the windows and the doors and walls. Then the king drowns and disappears in a kind of misty gray. And the curtain fails. And the show is over. And the king becomes a memory. Maybe a beautiful memory, growing with nostalgia. A milestone of this country. A milestone carved out of solid teak wood with a blade of skillful sculpture. And the curtain failed, and we left the theater. The king died, and this era ended with its good and bad sides. We sometimes talk about it, or read it in a book, or we watch it in a series. The world is states that follow one another, and one day we are happy, and another we are sad. Thanks.